Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Success Computer Consulting's Microsoft 365 Power User Group, Enhancing Productivity Using Microsoft Power Platform. Joining us today is the Microsoft Technology Center's Data and AI Architect, Valerie Bergman, along with Success's Business Integrations Analyst, Alex Hapka. Today you will learn how to use the tools in the Microsoft Power Platform to streamline your workflows and gain more ownership of your productivity. Before we get started, we have a few things to address. You'll notice a Q&A feature at the top right of your screen. It's two little comment box with a question mark in it. If you have any questions, please ask it using this feature and we will be sure to get it answered for you. And then within the next few days, you will receive the presentation deck from this event, as well as the link to the event recording. So we want to thank you for attending, and we hope you learn a lot today.
Alex, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Let me start over again here.
Yes.
Again, my name is Alex Hapka. I am the Business Integrations Analyst for Success Computer Consulting. Thank you so much for being here today. We're very excited to have you. What you're in store for today is that I'm going to do a little intro into the topic, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about when to automate and how to identify those automation candidates. Then I'm going to pass it over to Valerie Bergman, who is from the Microsoft Technical Center in Minneapolis, to go over the Power Platform and talk to you a little bit more about that. I'll do a little bit of licensing discussion, just a general overlook of the licensing. And then if there's any extra questions after all of this that we didn't address during the presentation, we'll have a little Q&A time. So let me start with this. Have you ever been working on a task or a process and you have ever thought there's got to be a better way to do this? Or maybe you're wondering, why is this taking so long? We're already behind. We need to find a way to speed this up. Or maybe there's too many tasks to coordinate between different people. Where are you going to even start? Or maybe you've gotten to the very end of your process and you realize that you missed a step, but at that point it's too late to fix, let alone try to find the step because you don't have the data to figure out which step you've missed. Well, all these thoughts are valid, and it's essentially you're trying to find a way to take your inner workings and take it to that next level. And what we're proposing is that next level could be automation. The beauty of it is that the tools are already readily available within the Power Platform, and what we're going to focus on today is Power Apps and Power Automate. Not only can you automate your tasks, it'll also record and give you a paper trail of all those processes within those two apps. They work seamlessly together as well, using the backbone of the Microsoft Dataverse, formerly known as the Common Data Service. And any solution that you create is easily accessible, and it follows the same security protocols that Microsoft already has and the credentials that you would use to log in. The other part of it is that they do have templates involved within the programs that you're able to choose from that might already be solving some of those roadblocks that you're running into. Before you go into the automation, though, the automation creation process or finding that template that you feel you would need, I would recommend going in with a plan. And by that, I think you should create a plan to guide you through the creation process. And you can do this by doing 3 simple steps. The first step is that you'd want to identify the flow or process that you wish to automate. And then once you find that process that you want to automate, you want to create a list of each of the tasks that are within that flow or process. A lot of times when we do this step, though, we tend to generalize the process. So you want to make sure that you're very specific on each task that you have within your process. The example I like to use is an exercise of imagining that you're talking to someone that's never made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich before. They have no idea of how to do that, and you need to explain to them how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Well, it's not that you're going to get the bread, spread the peanut butter and jelly, close and enjoy, but rather you're getting the bread, you're getting the jelly, you're getting the peanut butter, getting the knife. You get my point. So the point is that no task is too small to record down when you're putting together this list. Once you have that list, you want to ask 3 questions of each of those tasks. The first question I feel is the most important is, what is the balance of the task in regards to business value and expertise in education? And the best way to describe that is in this graph here. So every single task has a certain business value associated with it. And then that task also has a certain amount of expertise or education that is needed to complete that task. Based off of that balance is going to determine if you need to automate, or maybe you need to continue to do it in person. Or, maybe it's something that has a lot of expertise that's needed for it, but has a very low business value. You might not want to do it at all. Maybe you want to drop it from the process to speed it up. So an example would be like a reminder email, specifically a payment due reminder email. It has a high business value because you're reminding your client or your customer that a payment is coming up, and that's the income and payment of your services. But it might have a low expertise associated with it. Maybe it's just copying a template, putting it in the email, filling out the information and sending it out. This might be a prime automation candidate. In contrast, if you think of like an on-site evaluation of equipment. So if you're sending someone out to do an evaluation of the equipment on site, you might need someone that has a high education on what equipment is out there to do a proper evaluation. It also gives you a high business value because you're level setting with your client so that if ever they need help or they need something fixed, you already know what's on site and what condition it is in. In a sales perspective, you would know all the equipment that's on site so that when a new piece of equipment comes on the market, you'd be able to evaluate if you need to upgrade that equipment. Once you figure out that balance between the value and expertise, I have 2 more questions here that you'd want to ask, and they're very quick. I'll hit them quickly, but the second question is how much time does it take? This is a great question to ask because it'll pinpoint 2 things. The first thing is that it could help you identify any bottlenecks in the process. So you may be looking through and find out that a reminder email is taking 30 minutes. Well, because you asked this question, now you can ask the other questions of why is it taking this long? Is there parts of that reminder email task that can be automated to speed things up? Because you don't want this bottleneck to be holding up the line. The second thing is that generally, when you're looking at tasks, anything that is doesn't take that long to do, generally are low expertise tasks, which means that it could benefit from automation, or perhaps it's something that doesn't need to be within the process. A simple click of this, a simple sending out an email, calling this person, those are different things that you might find, well, I could find a way to automate this. The third question that you would want to ask is, what programs do you use for that task? And the reason why I put this in here is because Power Platform has over 300 connectors. And what a connector is it's a pre-coded bridge between the program and your automation or app. Because they have over 300 connectors, it's a very long list. So being able to identify which program you use for each task will help you ultimately when you're creating the app or the automation, because you'll be able to find that within the list and search it if you need to. The other thing is that when you ask this question, it might identify any legacy programs. And what I mean by legacy programs are even though Power Platform has over 300 connectors, it doesn't mean that it has every single program imaginable out there. So if you can identify a legacy program that maybe they don't have within that list, that's when you'd want to do something called a custom connector. And in those instances, you'd want to get your IT department involved because it would require getting an API key and setting it up on the back end. So after you ask those questions and you record all those down for each of those tasks, the third step is to create a flow chart. This essentially is going to be your roadmap as you're creating the different automation or app. It will ensure that you don't leave out any steps, and because it's very simple to read, you can show it to a coworker to make sure you're not missing a step. Make sure that you also are highlighting those that you wish to automate, because a lot of times, I mean, especially with when I get into creating these automations, sometimes I get so into the creation aspect of it, I forget which ones I'm supposed to automate. So by highlighting it, it just kind of is a call out. And the other part of it is that the Power Automate program, when you're actually putting in the steps, it's essentially a flow chart. So if you have this in front of you, you won't get lost or veer off too much. You'll be able to know where you're going, where you've been, and exactly where you're at. So here's an example of a flow chart that I put together. It's a very simple sales request process. The sales request comes in, the coordinator puts it into a SharePoint list, and the sales director puts a salesperson associated with it, and the coordinator communicates with the requester. The blue is the ones that I feel are prime automation candidates. And as you can see, I listed out the task, the programs involved, and the time that it takes. And this is just a way for me to, make sure that I keep track of things. So that's basically my spiel around when to automate and how to find your automation candidates. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Valerie Bergman from the Microsoft Technical Center in Minneapolis to do kind of an overview of the Power Platform and how it can power these manual tasks.
So good morning, everybody. I kind of missed the days where I could see faces in rooms. The last time that I did an event like this with Success, we were in the Microsoft Technology Center, and I got to look out and see people, and we could engage and interact. So welcome to our virtual world, and I miss all of you. So welcome to my basement instead of the Technology Center today. So I am going to share out my desktop with everybody, I think. Yeah, here we go. I'm just going to share my whole desktop because I'm going to pop between some things. So hopefully this works smoothly. And I'm going to start us off with just a quick kind of overview of Power Apps, Power Platform, Power Automate, and all these power words that Microsoft has been introducing. So, first of all, if you have never been to the Microsoft Technology Center, I want to make sure you know what they are. Microsoft Technology Centers are in, I think we have 30 locations across the United States, and there's one in Edina, Minnesota, which is where I work. I think it is one of the coolest places in the world. The Technology Center is a space where Microsoft and our customers and our partners and our technology community can band together and dream up ways that we can innovate and change the world together. So I welcome you to come in as soon as the world is open back up and either participate in some community events that we have, or bring in people from your teams and you can work with architects like myself. So I'm an architect in the Technology Center. I cover the data and AI space primarily, but I come from an app dev background. And I have played many roles in technology creation, including a short stint as project manager. I did a lot of strategy consulting. So Power Platform for me kind of works into the sweet spot of my favorite thing to do with technology is to enable people to solve problems for their business in new ways so that they can be more productive, or so that they can get new insights, or so that they can get something to market faster. So Power Platform has taken on this huge life within our customer base, and it's because of this kind of picture here. So software went from paper to digital, 20 years ago. But there's still, so, and then when that happened, when software became part of how we did business, there were core processes that would get covered by your back-end ERP system or by a CRM system or by some other big system that you had purchased and installed off the shelf, whether it's an on-prem or now a lot of these are SaaS-based solutions. And that covers a portion of the processes and opportunities within the way your business is run. And then there is another little option here, and you can create some of your own custom solutions to cover the gap. So the off-the-shelf software will cover a portion of your business processes, and then you might have a development team inside of your organization, or you might hire companies like Success to come in and help you create custom solutions to fill in gaps of things that your off-the-shelf software is not doing for your organization. But those teams, those development teams, are very stretched and their budget doesn't seem to be increasing, yet the number of requests for custom solutions seems to be hockey sticking up. So what do you do when you don't have unlimited budget, but you have nearly limitless requests from the business? And in fact, as soon as one request is completed, there's probably a new one that's popped up because your business is always moving and changing. So that is this missed opportunity space where organizations fill in all of those things with ways to get things done. There might be a lot of processes inside of businesses that are getting done via email. There might be spreadsheets that are being emailed around. There might be stick-it notes that are stuck to computers to remind you to do things. So Power Platform is about how could we start moving the power of technology and being able to shape solutions in the technology down to the people who are in the business that need those solutions. So Power Platform is about enabling the business to create some solutions for the problems that are the opportunities that they have. And as someone who comes from an IT background, I have seen where there are tools like this in the past and you end up with cobbled together little pieces of things all over the place that aren't protected and maybe aren't secured. But Power Platform allows these solutions to be built in a way that IT has visibility into them and IT can put some nice controls and guardrails. Or as I like to say, IT can kind of wrap the business in a big like security and governance hug. So that's overall what Power Platform is. So let's hop a little bit more into what that looks like. So first we have a business need to do things within the business that might not be solved by a solution that you already have, a technology solution that you already have in place. There might be data that your organization would like to measure. There might be ways that your business needs to interact with each other and interact maybe with data and other groups and other systems that you have. And you also may want to automate processes that you currently have manual paper-based. So the Power Platform is about how do we enable these citizen, and so we have citizen developers with Power BI, we have citizen analysts, we talk about citizen data scientists is a new term that's being brought up as well. So Power Platform includes some tools that can help empower those citizen users within your organization. So Power BI, I know was covered in another session. Power BI is another area where I have a lot of passion around. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agent. So we're going to hop into what they are. I plan to show you, but I was going to show you quickly, and I have a little bit of a demo prepared, although I have backup in PowerPoint slides because we all know sometimes the demo gods do not smile on us. But we're going to go into each of these and talk about what they are. And each of these things, from if you're someone who's more from an IT background or if you're an administrator, it's good for you to understand that these tools are building on top of our Azure Cloud Services. So it's under the covers, we are leveraging things like Azure Functions and Azure Synapse, Azure Logic Apps, Azure Event Grid to do all of the things that enable this Power Platform. And since we're extending these tools, we also have the ability from an IT perspective to take a tool that has been very successfully built by the business and operationalize it so that it can be delivered to the rest of the organization. And all of this stuff is acting on a set of connectors and data sources that will allow you, and in my data world, this is what makes me so excited, but will allow you to get that data into your overall data estate so that you can do things like get new insights on how your business is working, or maybe ensure that there's some kind of quality measure around a process that you weren't able to do before. So I'm going to talk about the different data options that we have as well. So my first foray here is we're going to talk about Power Apps. So Power Apps is a concept of I have data, and by the way, your data may or may not be in a location that you can, it may not be an electronic location, but we have data somewhere. And what if we could create an app from that data so that instead of us having to do things in paper, we could electronically enable our users to interact. And not only can we electronically enable our users to interact, but what if we could do this in a way where people could interact on devices that might not be your traditional desktop? So the apps from data, I'm going to get a little bit more into how you would do this if you have a paper-based app right now. But the idea here is let's get the application into the hands of the person who is closest to the process so that they can incorporate the app into how they do their work. And people have been doing that with paper. So let's give your business users or your customers the ability to have their phone in their hand to get their work done. And maybe they just need to enter in a couple pieces of information in this overall big process. So Power Apps allows you to stitch that all together. So in Power Apps, you kind of have two options here. We have an option where we can start with a blank. So Canvas apps will start with a blank app, and you can connect in data and you can add in fields and you can customize it as much as you want. So that is the Canvas app. So oops, I thought that I was going to do a build for the model app. And the model driven app is where you can connect to a data source, and then Power Apps will automatically generate this application for you based on what it's seeing in the data source. So pretty cool, because behind the scenes, there's some AI going on there in order to crawl through your data sources and to make guesses on which type of entry you would like. So I am going to show you in a moment a really quick, here's how you can create a Power App from a data source. Easy authoring. So once we create the Power App, I'll get into this too. I'll let you kind of take a peek at this canvas. But the idea here is in the center, when you do create a Power App, if you are a true business user, this is going to show you here's what your app is going to look like. And you can debug from here. You can interact with the buttons from here. And this is a truly what you see is what you get kind of development experience. You have the option to dive in and to do some things with functions and to author code in here, but you don't have to. So I'm going to show you that quickly. And the connected data. So you've already heard about all of the connectors that are available inside of Power Platform. So this is just a quick look at the connectors. The number of connectors, I always forget because it's constantly increasing. So right now we have 350 plus connected data sources. So these data sources are sources that Microsoft has built wrappers around the connectors into these backend systems. And as well as our partners can contribute into this connector library. And you have the ability to write a custom connector if the connector that you need for your organization, like maybe you have a mainframe somewhere and you want to be able to connect to that, you can write a custom connector to connect to that. But this is the connector library view. And the point here is Power Platform is not just about how to connect Microsoft solutions with Microsoft solutions. It's about how can you leverage a Microsoft tool to connect all of the different technologies that you have in your portfolio, regardless of if they're cloud-based competitive solutions to Microsoft, if they're old on-premises solutions that are legacy that have been in your environment for a long time, or if they're social feeds that we might want to connect to. So there are nearly limitless connector options, including generic connectors like ODBC connectors, OData connectors, and REST API calls to your library. And this is something that I used to struggle with as a developer. When I would write apps, when the idea of apps first came out and we were writing apps, we would have to test the app on all of the different mobile operating systems that were out there. So, for example, we would have to go in and make sure that the app worked on an iPhone, and we'd have to make sure that it would work in an Android operating system, and not just an Android operating system, any Android operating system. And Power Platform takes care of all of that for you. So there is a team of engineers at Microsoft that do the work to ensure that when you publish something in as a Power App, it will work on Windows, Android, and Apple OS, and it should work universally. I am unsure how many releases back we cover, but I know that we cover at least a few. So you can write once and it will go to any of these platforms. And there's also a set of IT governance like hugs that can go around the apps that you create. So there's a portal where admins can understand the telemetry around how apps are being used. They can set DLP policy, so data loss protection policy on data and connectors. And it's compliant with things like HIPAA, EU model clauses, SOC, and 13 plus global standards. So we're giving the business a powerful tool, but in a different way than when we gave access to the business users, we being Microsoft. So this time, the Power Platform that's out there operates within the context of your organization in a way that can be overseen, that can be monitored, that can be secured and audited. So that is really what Power Platform is, and Power Apps, how that fits into that overall picture. And pro developers are welcome. So this isn't just for the business. Pro developers can do things like they can write those functions and code modules. You also have the ability to export out an ARM template from a Power App that you created if you want to graduate this Power App into something like a Visual Studio editing tool. So now I'm going to show you how you can do this. I took some screenshots in case we ran into an issue, but like Alex had said, you should flow out your process. And this one that I did here was an internal. I'm going to do an escape here because I'm going to stop sharing that. It was an internal process, but I am going to go through an exercise with you, and maybe I have a minute to whiteboard it. And I'm going to whiteboard out what we're doing here. So I am going to stand up as I whiteboard because I have an easier time writing on that. So here we go. All right, so I'm going to flow out a process, and this is a time off request process. So I like to take vacation, and my manager needs to know if I'm going to plan a vacation so that he can ensure that there's coverage across our team. So that's kind of the business case. So the first thing that I want to do is I need to be able to ask my manager if I can take vacation. So I am going to request vacation for myself. So I'm going to do a flow here. So okay, so I'm going to say employee requests time off. Okay, and by the way, I do this today, and today how I do this is I send an email to my manager saying that I want time off. But so conceptually what I've done is I've asked for time off. Okay, so then my manager is somehow notified that I want time off. Okay. And now my manager has to look at my time off request and decide whether I get to take the time off or not. So I'm going to call that approve request. Okay. And the manager might approve it or might not approve it. I like to take the Visio approach to the process flow, by the way, if any of you recognize the shapes here. Okay. And if the request is approved, I want to let the employee who requested it know, hey, you get to take vacation. So okay, and otherwise, if the answer is no, then I'm going to say employee is notified of denial. So simple process, right? Okay, so if I were looking to automate this, the first thing that I would need to do is I would need to figure out, so we have our flow, I need to figure out what does my data look like that comes in with this. So we have an employee requesting time off. So we need, in that request, we need to understand from this here, let's talk about who the employee is that's requesting it, right? We probably want to know when they want to be off, and the when they want to be off is probably a time span. So we'd have a start date, and we'd have an end date. We might want to have a little more context. Maybe if I'm requesting time off because I have a family emergency, my manager might prioritize me over someone who's requesting time off because they would like to go on a trip or something. So I'm going to give a location for us. I'm going to give a field for us to enter in a little description of the request. And then if the manager says no, that I can't be off, I would kind of want to know why. So I'm going to also put in a place here where we want to be able to put in manager comments. Okay, and then I also need to have a status on this request because I'm going to either be approving it or denying it. So I need to be able to track whether it's been approved or denied. So I need a data source. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a data source. And my data source, a lot of times people have data sources in their Excel. You can connect Power Apps to Excels, but Excels aren't a relational backend data store. So I would recommend that you not lean on Excel, that you figure out where else could you put this data. We're going to talk about Dataverse and the Common Data, which is the new name for Common Data Service, later on in the session. But so right now, I'm going to consider taking this and making a very simple SharePoint list for my data source. So that's what I've done. I've gone in and I did this ahead of time so you guys didn't have to watch me type, but I created this list. And so I created a SharePoint list. I spun up a new site for this out just testing. But in this, I have who's requested the time off. And this requester is limited to a list of people within our organization. So it's tied to identities within our organization. And I gave a title is out of box. I left that alone. I created a description and a start date and an end date, manager comments, and status. So I set up this list and I did a little bit of testing. So now the next thing that I want to do here is I would like Valerie to be able to come in and request her time off. But I don't want to have to send her to a SharePoint list in order to do it. I would like Valerie to be able to have an app on her phone where she can request time off anytime she wants on her phone. So if I wanted to do that, there's a very simple way that if you're starting from a SharePoint list, you can create an app. And up here on the top of the SharePoint list, see that we have this integrate option. So I'm going to click down on this integrate option, and I am going to decide that I would like to create an app. So for Power Apps, I can create an app from this. So I'm going to go ahead and create an app, and I'm going to name it Time Off Request. And hit create. This is where our fingers are crossed because I had actually some server issues last night. But so we are creating our Power App, and Power Apps behind the scenes is crawling through that SharePoint list. It's taking a look at all of the columns and the fields that I have in there. If you'll notice, I had for the requester that was tied to an identity. And so that is going to be a different kind of entry field than when I put in just the description. And then we also have dates in there. So Power Apps is taking care of all of that for me, and it's assembling an app for me from my data. And it is guessing what I'd like it to look at. And from here, I could just run with it. So right here, this is what was created for me. And in our Power App, we have over on our right-hand side here, this is a tree navigation that lets us take a look at the forms that have been created for us in this app. So the first one says Browse Screen 1, and that shows me, this is a list of all of the time off requests that are in that SharePoint list. So, and by the way, over here, if I look at my connector library, you can see that I am connected right now to that SharePoint list. I can add other connections too. So maybe I wanted to enhance information about Valerie, or maybe I wanted to pull in some other relevant information from a different system. I could join in other data sources if I wanted. If I'm a developer or if I'm a super power user, I might do that. If I'm the business, I probably wouldn't, but that option is there. So I'm going to come back here into my tree view, and I'm going to take a peek at what was built for me. So I have this browse screen. I also have this screen is a detail screen, and looks like read-only versions of that entry. And then I have this edit screen, and this edit screen shows text entry abilities. So now up here at the top, so far I've changed nothing about this. Up here at the top, there's a preview app. And when you're previewing the app, this is actually a debug function if you're someone who understands the term debug. But I have the ability to run this, so I can hit preview, and this is now running, and this is how it's going to look on a phone. So I can test it out. So let's see what's going on here. I can search items. All right, let's look for Val. It's not finding Val. So we might want to investigate how that search is working. And then I also have some buttons up here, so I can refresh, I can sort, and I can create new items. I also have the ability here to view this. So let's just kind of see how this navigates together. So I can go through and I can view, and here's my time off request. Okay, can't do anything with it from here. Oh yeah, I can edit it. So maybe I want to change my title and description from test and test to where I really want to go. So let's see. I want to go to Florida, and I want to visit an old friend. Okay, and the status here is pending. Okay, so as I look at this, I'm not sure that I want to allow the requester to approve their own request. So maybe that's something that I want to change. And I have my start date and my end date, and here's my requester. If I do a drop down in the requester list, notice here how this works. So as I start typing, you'll see that it's pulling up people from the Microsoft list of identities, and there I am. And then I have this attachments thing showing down here. I'm not sure why I have attachments. That must be an out-of-box thing. I don't really want that attachment thing, but now I can see how this all works. Let's do a checkbox to submit it. And oh, look, Valerie wants to go to Florida to visit an old friend. Cool. Let's go back to my main list. Valerie wants to visit an old friend. She wants to go to Florida. Okay, so I didn't code anything yet. I didn't even adjust anything that Power Apps did out of box for me, but there's a functioning Power App. And now I want to show you, if we come back here to our HR site, our SharePoint list, now you can see that Valerie wants to go to Florida to visit an old friend, and it put the start date is 4 days from now. So this is all hooked up and working just as is. If I wanted to make a few tweaks, there are a few things that I'd like to do. So I'm just going to show you a few tweaks. I'm not going to do too many because I also don't want to run out of time. But I could decide, hey, you know what? I don't want this status field. I don't want that to show. So I'm going to turn that one off. So status is not going to show up for Valerie. And I also don't want the attachments to show. So I'm going to turn that one off too. Okay. So now with 2 clicks, I removed fields from my form that I don't want to show up in that new entry. I still do want to see though on this read screen, I'd like to be able to see the status there. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave that one there. So again, I can do the play up here button, and I can do a debug mode. I also have the ability to just interact directly with this center section by holding down my Alt key. So let's see, did it take that I can't do those? I can't update the status anymore? Yes. Okay, perfect, cool. So there we go. Now what we'd want to do next is we would want to publish. So we can come over here and we can, let's give this one a save. And then let's share it. Oops, I also had a publish button that popped up there. So we can publish it here too. So publishing will make this version available to everyone who can use permissions. So I'm not going to publish it right now because I don't need this to show up into the Microsoft Power Apps library, but that's where it would go. And I also can decide who has the rights to see this time off request. Another thing that's interesting to note is the security that goes along with this is tied to my data source. So people are going to have to log in to my app. So they're going to have to be able to have permissions to see my app in order to get to the app. But then when they log in, this connection that I have over here to the SharePoint list. And by the way, if you guys have questions as we're going through, I should have invited that at the beginning. I can't see the question window right now, but our moderators can. So if you guys have questions, comments, anything as I'm going through, please hop in. Because again, I wish you were sitting in the class and I wish you were asking me questions right now. But I invite that as we go along. So I was talking about the security. So here we go. Where'd that go now? So publish it, I could do that, but I'm just going to come back here into this app, and this connection that we have here, I picked, by default, it is going to use the context of the logged in user to the Power App to see if that user has the rights to connect to, read, and update the data source. So another step that I would do here is I would make sure that everyone on my team could access that list, and I would give them rights to make updates to that list. Alternatively, I can override that. That's the behavior that is default, is when you do a connection, the connection is going to, when the app runs, the connection is going to get made with the logged in user's credentials. If you wanted to override that so that my time off request application had its own identity, and I could limit that SharePoint list to this application's identity, that's something I can do as an override. But again, that's not what would happen by default. So if we're talking about your business users doing this, that's how the security is going to get implemented for your business users. So I didn't have to do anything to say who could access this. The security got hooked up behind the scenes in connection with the Azure Active Directory rules that I have in place. So those Azure Active Directory rules would get applied here into the SharePoint site list, and we would have to decide who has the ability to look at and read this list. Okay, so I have just gone through a very quick, here's how you create a Power App, and I haven't even been speaking for a whole 30 minutes. So in less than 30 minutes, I have a data source that I created, although I did create that one ahead of time, but it doesn't take long to set up a SharePoint list. But I've created a data source, and I have created a Power App from that data source that allows us to give employees the ability to type into a location, a data location, a time off request, and then we have those requests together in a list instead of having those zipping around in email inside the organization. So once we have these time off requests in the list, we then have the ability to do things like put some quality controls around it. Maybe we want to have some rules about how long a request can sit in the list before a manager can answer it. And we get visibility into the time off requests that have come in. We have history around how often has Valerie asked for time off? How often has Valerie been approved versus how often has Jeff, her coworker, been approved? So we now have this rich set of information in a location where we can do more things with it. So that is how quickly you can build a Power App. So,
hey Val,
yes.
we do have a question.
Yay, good.
So the question is, are you showing a mobile view, or you are showing a mobile view? Is there also a corresponding desktop view for any of these Power Apps?
Yes. So when you create when you create it, by default, you're going to get the mobile app out of the button that I showed you from the SharePoint list. So you didn't see a prompt asking me what I wanted the layout to be. But if we were looking at, let's see, if I was here inside of my Power App Creator and I wanted to create a Power App here, you see here there's phone layout options on these. And there are also, so you have the ability to pick. I thought that it would show us a list of, let me just go back to the home. I thought that it would show us a list. Oh, there we go. There's one that has tablet outlet, tablet layout. So the templates, by the way, are super cool. There is a lot of templates that we have published into our template library. And you do have the option when you're creating the app, whether you want it to be phone layout or tablet layout. Currently, you pick one or the other. So you would do a phone layout and a tablet layout if you wanted to have two different interfaces. It doesn't redraw it for you based on the device. So currently that is the implementation of it. And then there's also the ability for you to, these apps were originally set up for you to build them for internal within your organization consumption. So if someone wanted to use an app that you built, they would have to be part of your organization's Active Directory. However, there is a newer release, it's not as new anymore, I mean, at least 6 months old, where you can also build an app now that is meant for consumption by, they still need to be authenticated, but you can have consumption for people who are outside of your organization. And for that is, we call it our portal functionality. So that is contained within a web application versus an application for a phone or a device. And the Power Apps can also, so if I was using a Power, and Microsoft actually has a bunch of Power Apps that we use. So an example of a Power App that we have that I use regularly is after I am done with a customer engagement. So I facilitate often day-long customer engagements where we do architectural designs, or we do hacks, or we talk about strategy and roadmaps. And at the end of every customer engagement that I complete, there's a Power App that my leadership team has built where I go in and I enter information about the engagement so that they can track some metrics. So they want to know how many people attended, and they want to know what industry my customer was from. They want to know what we talked about, so topics that were covered during the session. They want to know whether I leveraged any experts outside of my immediate team. And they also wanted to know whether I felt like I was prepared enough by my account team. So all of that information is captured in a Power App, and I can use it. I use it on my computer, and it is embedded into Teams, and it's exposed through a Teams link on the top, so I can get to it that way. I also can use it on my phone. So I used to occasionally travel for my engagements that I do. And when I was on the way to the airport after my engagement, I could quick fill out that information on my phone, because until I have that information completed for an engagement, I don't get credit for that engagement. So I have been inspired to do it as quickly as possible before I forget. So that's how Power Apps is helping. That's an example of how a Power App is being used both in the mobile version, as well as being used on a device. And the device, I don't usually work off of a tablet, so I'm generally on my phone or I'm on my service. Is that helpful?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for answering that. We don't have any more right now, but I will let you know.
Okay, so we took a quick cruise through Power App. There's so much you can do in Power App, so much more you can do. But so then I said, but what if? So the next thing I was going to talk about is like, okay, so we did this process, but what do I do now? So back in our whiteboard, oh, where's my whiteboard? Here. Back in the whiteboard, so we went through currently and we created our data source. So I like to check box things because it makes me feel like I'm succeeding. So we've done this. Okay. So now we wanted more to happen in our process after that. So we want our manager to get notified of the request so that he could review it and decide if it's going to get approved or not. So again, we could have the manager go into the SharePoint list, and the manager could just monitor that SharePoint list and anytime could watch for new entries. And when a new entry comes in, could review it and do something in the list. So we could do it that way, but we also could take advantage of Power Automate. So the next portion of the Power Platform that I'm going to talk about quickly, and I'll put this back into this slideshow. So here. So I'm going to talk about Power Automate. Okay. So Power Automate is just a workflow management tool that we have, and it doesn't have a user interface associated with it, but it can get called by all kinds of different triggers and mechanisms. So Power Automate can do things like send notifications. It can synchronize data between sources. So perhaps you have invoices that get dropped in a folder by a vendor of yours. And when that invoice gets dropped, you'd like to pick it up and do stuff with it and maybe import it into a system that you have. Power Automate could take care of something like that. It also can be used to collect data from different sources and again, just kind of synchronize move. And we can automate approvals, which sounds like what we want to have happen with our process. We would like for when something lands in our SharePoint list, we would like to notify the manager so that we could automate the approval process by our manager. So Power Automate will do that for us. Power Automate, like Power Apps, has a template library, and the Power Automate template library is ginormous. So if you want to play around with Power Automate, please peruse the library because you can get as a starting point very close to what you're trying to do. And if you notice, there's a whole bunch of icons showing up on this screen. So back to our comments earlier about the connector library. So Power Automate uses the same connector library as Power Apps, and you can see all of the icons that show you that not only are we automating workflows between Microsoft technologies, but we also have the ability for you to automate workflows that include things that are completely outside of the Microsoft platform. So an example here is you see Twitter birds. So we can listen for tweets and then we can do things based on the tweet. We also, I don't know if this slide is showing it, but Salesforce shows up in our template library. And Salesforce is a direct competitor to Dynamics. So the Power Platform, this is just reiterating, this Power Platform is not just meant for leveraging with the Office 365 or Dynamics 365 suite of solutions, which if you have used, there is an automation tool that we had built into the SharePoint environment prior. And this, people have asked me, can I take those workflows and can I port them over into Power Automate? And the answer is no, you can't. It's a rewrite, which might bum you out a little bit. But the reason why it's a rewrite is because the architecture underneath is completely different architecture. Because this was intended to be, how can we help you plug in whatever you're using? Bring whatever you have inside of your organization. Let us just help you stitch it together. So templates are cool. Make sure you check them out. And I'm going to show you what this looks like in a minute again, but just so you kind of have an idea of what we're going to be taking a look at. So flows get triggered by something, And the thing that triggers it, after that, you then have the ability to set scope around variables so that you can share them within that scope. You can create actions. The actions, there's a whole library of actions, and then you can create conditions, and you see our yes, no path. So the way that this is laid out might look familiar to you if you're used to working with any kind of workflow design tool. It reminds me slightly of Visio. This is intended to be very focused towards enabling people who are the business to go in and author these. Okay, another part of Power Automate that I'm not going to show you today, but I want to make sure that you're aware exists, is robotic process automation. So there was a gap where we have a lot of customers who have old legacy technologies, especially in places like manufacturing plants or other large old facilities that have mainframe systems that are tied up to help them run processes where it'd be really expensive for them to take them out. They're currently working, they're going to let them run, but they want to be able to understand, they want to be able to integrate workflows with what's happening with those mainframe processes. So there is a robotic process automation component that was added to Power Automate about a year ago. So if you have been working with the Power Platform for a while, you might get confused by the word Power Automate because it used to be called Flow. So we've renamed Flow to Power Automate because that Power Automate workflow engine allows you to write custom flows as well as to do the robotic process automation. So I just want to make sure you are aware of that. So there you go. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to escape out of here and I'm going to come back into my list. Okay, so we wanted to go through that next step now of building in workflow with my SharePoint list. So we wanted to notify my manager for approval if I request something if I request this time off. So how we can do that is if we look back at our list, if we start with our source, by the way, Power Apps or Power Platform does a lot for you when you start with source. So I'm going to start with my source. I'm going to start at this list. Alternatively, I could start from scratch and I could put these pieces together myself, but I'm just trying to show you from a business user perspective how things can be done like that. So here we go. Integrate here with this list. I want to integrate Power Automate and I want to create a flow. So I'm going to click on that. And when I click on that, I get over on the right-hand side a wizard that comes up that says, do you want to start with a template or do I want to start blank? So I'm going to look at the templates I have available. I can send a customized email when a new SharePoint list is added. No. Start an approval when a new item is added. Ooh, I do want to do that. Request an approval. Everyone must approve for a selected item. Probably not that one. Request a manager approval for a selected item. Oh, that sounds even closer to what I want to do. So I am going to click on that one. And a flow is going to get created for me. I don't need to see what's new. Okay, so the flow is going to be created. So this flow needs to connect to different data sources. It needs to connect to the SharePoint list, and it has tested that I have the ability to do that. Yep, okay, cool. It also needs to connect to Office 365 users, and you might be wondering why, but you'll see as we get into here, we want Val's manager to get notified when I request time off. So in order to figure out who my manager is, I want to look at my hierarchy inside of Office 365 to see that information. So that's why we're going to connect to this. And then we want to use the approvals from Office 365. Cool, we're connected to that. We're also going to send messages and notifications. So this one is still logging in, loading. So we're waiting for that to complete before I can say create this flow. But when we have that done, then we can pop in and take a look at what is built for us out of box. Any questions as this is slowly logging in today?
Hey Val, while we're waiting, can you kind of, do we know how the connectors are like put into place? in case like there's a program or something that people want to see in the connectors. Do you know what that process is like?
Are you talking about if you want to request that a new connector get added?
Yeah.
Okay, so if there's a connector that you wish was in the connector library that isn't there, throughout any of the Office 365 solutions, there's always this little question mark help up at the top. And if you click on that, we have documentation, which generally will give you contextual documentation based on where you are. We have links to learning. So if you're stuck and you need to learn, there you go. We have some published roadmap items. So these are public published roadmap items. We also have community and blog. So if you are trying to do something and you're struggling and our documentation maybe isn't telling you exactly what you need, you also can post out into the community. And if you post into this community and blog, there's a lot of interaction, and the Microsoft engineering team watches this community. They're the ones who posted the blog, but they watch the community and they answer questions that you put in there. So the engineering team is very closely connected in with this. And then you also have this give feedback. And in the give feedback, you have the ability to request features. And when a feature is requested, whether it is a new connector or you say, hey, I wish that this thing worked a little differently than it does, the community can vote on your feedback, and the engineering team uses all of that feedback in order to decide where they're going to spend their engineering time. So that's how you can request that a connector get added by Microsoft. However, there also is the ability for people who are outside of Microsoft to write custom connectors that they think might be valuable for other people. So for example, if you work for a company who has a software product that you deploy out to your customers, like, Salesforce is a company that does that. They have a SaaS solution and they sell it to their customers. Salesforce has the option of writing their own connector for the library that we have here and submitting it. So there's a submission process where they submit it to Microsoft and they say, I think this connector is a good candidate for your connector library. Microsoft looks at the connectors and just ensures that it is secure. And then Microsoft will publish it out to the library. So Microsoft publishes to the library as well as partners publishing to the library. And with that said,
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to give this and I'm going to kill this because it shouldn't take that long for it to connect to my Office 365. So I'm going to give it one more chance. And if that doesn't work, then I'm going to have to take you through my slides. All right, so we're going to request manager approval. Okay, and it is going through and it is trying my login, and those two clicked up right away. And my internet connectivity maybe is slow. It does generally like bam, bam, bam. So, all right, so let's see. I might need to, we'll let that run for a minute in the background and I'll take us back here. Oh, I didn't do a lot of the flow things. So this flow here, what we would see is I am going to go into slideshow mode with this. Okay. Doing that, it's doing that flow that we were going to create. So when a request is created, so this connector, you saw that it was logging in and it was connecting to the SharePoint list. So the trigger of a new item is created is an out-of-box trigger that was available that got parked into this flow for us. So this whole thing that you're seeing here, this is what happens when we click on that button without me writing any code. So when a request is created off of the SharePoint list, whoops, we want to initiate an approval. And so the first thing that we want to do is we need to know who we're going to send the approval to. So we are going to go look at the requester. So we have the requester field in our SharePoint list, and we are going to get the manager of that requester. So that's what this is. And there's just a library, and I might try a different flow so I can just kind of show you guys these libraries in a second here. But we can, in that library for Office 365, there is a Get Manager option. So I just picked the Get Manager option, although this was put in the template for us when I did this. So we can get the Requesters Manager, and then I want to, so we would probably change this because we start out with our item as pending approval, but they're saying they have like a new item and then they switch it to pending. So we can go back into that SharePoint list and we can update information, and we know the context of which item we want to update information for, because that gets passed in here in this trigger. So we want to go back to the item that kicked off this and we want to update the status to pending. And then we want to start an approval process. And when we start the approval process, that is set to wait for a response. So this flow could run, and it runs behind the scenes. You can have multiple flows running at a time within your tenant. So this flow would get kicked off and started, and it would wait for a response to come back from the manager before it goes down the rest of the path. So something that's cool about flows is you can watch them execute as they're executing for debugging purposes, as well as to check in and monitor. So then we can, it's going to wait for something to come back from the manager, whether they give an approve yes or no. So then there's a condition that's in here, and this condition says if the response equals approve, then go down this yes path, which is send an email back to the person who requested the vacation, letting them know that their vacation request has been approved. And then the next thing that you're not seeing on this down here is update our item from pending approval to approved. If they say no, send the rejection email and update the status to say denied. So that's what would be going on. That's what this flow creates for us. This is still going. So do I have a flow created that I can show you? Okay, let's see. Can I look at this one? Details. Oh, this is going to try to log me in here, but it says I'm logged in. So after you created a flow, you do have the ability to see how many times it has executed and the status of it. You can also click into that, and you can see this one, each of these steps completed. And if I expand out the step, I can see what the input was from it and the output from each step. So if I want to troubleshoot, I have all of the ins and outs of each of these steps that I can grab and use for troubleshooting information. So that is what this is our screen that allows us to check into each of these. But now if I want to edit, I want to edit this flow. So I am going to edit up here. So I just want to show you guys around the flow a little bit. So here is an example of what you see when you are authoring a flow. So get profile. There are some options that come in. This one's a pretty simple one. Get my manager though. Get manager, I pass in the principal. And so this is the principal of whatever is passed in here. So here it's who, I think it's who sent the email. But if I wanted to add a step, it's just, you just click add, say add an action, and then you can see here's the library of actions that I can add. So let's say that I wanted to put an approval in here. So here's our approval. I can filter this list by approvals. I can also, it's showing me anything that matches the word approve. So I can start and wait for an approval, which is what was happening in the one that I showed you. I can create a new approval, or I can wait for an approval. So if I say start and wait for an approval, you can see here's all that I need to do is say what approval type is this. So approve, reject, everyone must approve, reject, first to respond. Custom response, I'm going to do an approve, reject, first to respond. And then I can set some more parameters about this approval. So what am I going to title it? Who's it assigned to? So I might assign it to the manager. So if I want to assign it to something that came from this step, I can see, I want to name that step Add dynamic content. Oh, sorry, this is falling off my screen because I have this. There we go. So the Git manager, I want to send it to the Git manager's email. So come down here, display name, given name, ID, email. So there we go. So that's just kind of showing you how you can interact with the flow. Okay, so had we been looking at what came out of box for us, we just went through the process of creating a flow that the manager gets notified that there's a request, has logic in there to approve or deny the request, and then it will notify the employee of a denial and of an approval. And again, we're at 10:10 now. I had some logging in issues. Had that not happened, I would have already had that flow would have just been there. So you would have had that flow created. We would have authored everything right now. So that's where we are on that. Okay. We talked about that. So now I'm going to go through quickly CDS, and this should be a fast slideshow from current slide. Okay. So in the example that we just went through, we created SharePoint list as our data source. And that actually works for a surprising number of processes that are really good candidates for Power Platform. So there are a ton of processes inside of every organization that I've worked with where it's a pretty simple process. The data isn't really connected with much else. So like the time off request, that's a pretty siloed thing. So cool, do it as a SharePoint list. So SharePoint list is a great option for many things, but maybe you have something that's a little bit more complex. So you might have a little bit more complex thing that you're trying to accomplish. For example, I was talking to a customer recently, and they're a manufacturing customer, and they have a whole bunch of paper processes that are on their plant floor that they're trying to switch from a paper process into an electronic process. And the things that they're gathering like inventory information, and they're gathering status on production line things. So those things, a SharePoint list maybe isn't the best place for that information, because that information is really an enrichment of information that they are collecting in other parts of their processes that exist in their ERP system. So that's an example of where maybe SharePoint isn't the best place. Or maybe you have a process where there's a whole bunch of lookups, where if I pick something in my first field, then my second field is going to filter differently. And then if I pick something in that second field, my third field is going to filter differently. So I might have a whole bunch of lookup values that are related back in and that drive logic inside of the rest of my process. So you can do that in SharePoint. You can have a SharePoint list for your main stuff, and you can have another SharePoint list for lookup values, but it gets complicated fast. So that is where this idea of what used to be called Common Data Service up until like 2 weeks ago, and is now called Dataverse. That's where that comes into our story when we're talking Power Platform. But I'm not a DBA. So, because another thing I could do is I could just spin up an Azure SQL database. And again, as a developer, that's where my head would go right away. If I have complex relationships, I might just spin up an Azure SQL database. But in order to spin up an Azure SQL database, I need to pick my server size, and I need to create the actual database. And I need to know things about setting up primary keys and building in foreign key relationships so that I can get those lookup relationships back to my main data. And do I also want to spin up a new Azure SQL database for every one of my processes that I have that are a little bit more complex than a SharePoint list? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. And maybe I don't know if there's already an Azure SQL database spun up somewhere that I could leverage. So I'm not a DBA, but I need to do some of the things that a relational data store will give me. So that's where we enter in Microsoft Dataverse. So Microsoft Dataverse took me a little bit of time to get my head around Microsoft Dataverse. And again, from the standpoint of someone who is a developer, I would just keep going back and saying, why wouldn't I just use Azure SQL? But why wouldn't I just use Azure SQL? But why wouldn't I just use Azure SQL? So what Microsoft Dataverse is it is a low code database, and under the covers a little bit lower, what it is Azure SQL, but there is a graphic user interface on top of that Azure SQL instance that allows business users to create tables and to create fields in the tables and to manage the relationships between them. The terminology has recently changed. So this used to be called Common Data Service, and tables used to be called entities, and fields used to be called attributes. Now it is called Dataverse, and the entities are called tables, and the attributes are called columns. So if you are playing around with Dataverse, know that in the documentation, there might be some mapping that you'll have to do as we catch up all of our documentation to the new terminology. But so all Dataverse is taking away all of the DBA stuff that you would need to do in order to set up a relational store, and allowing someone who doesn't know how to write SQL, allowing them to create their tables and create their columns and create the relationships between those tables through like wizard experiences. So through a web-based interface, they can create this. And Dataverse also is what Dynamics 365 is built on top of. So if you are a Dynamics 365 user, you are already using Dataverse inside of your organization. Let's see, what else do I want to say about Dataverse? Okay, so the way that Dataverse gets used, there's kind of two different patterns for Dataverse, or two complementary patterns actually for Dataverse. So Dataverse, you can use Dataverse to become that central hub for all of the data that you need in your app. So when I opened up Power Apps and I showed that we could have a connection in Power Apps, we also had the ability to connect in other data sources. So we could connect data sources all over the place, and Power Apps could manage that for you. So Dataverse, one pattern of how people use Dataverse, in addition to you just need something more complex than a SharePoint list, is people use Dataverse as the place where they're pulling data from different silos into one view, if you will. And then that view is what your business users can connect to when they're doing their apps, so that they don't have to know how to connect to and relate to all of these different sources. You can just do it in that one view. So that's the focal point of your data. That's one pattern. And then another pattern for how Dataverse is used is there's an SDK where developers can, through code, so if they're using Visual Studio, there's an SDK that they can connect right into that Dataverse library, the Dataverse Relational Data Store, and they can leverage things in Dataverse, even though they might be tables that business users have created. Now developers can access that data so that they can do other additional apps on top of that data, as well as from a business intelligence standpoint, and an artificial intelligence standpoint for that matter. Dataverse is a full-fledged Azure data service that can be part of your overall data estate that can be leveraged by things like Power BI, Azure Synapse Analytics. So that's in a nutshell what Dataverse is, and understanding what's going on under the covers. So this under the covers piece that you're seeing here, the load balancer, web, job, sandbox reporting, the SQL Elastic Pools blob. So Dataverse does also leverage blob storage for all of the document store, and it has direct connectors into Data Lake, Cosmos DB, Azure Search. So all of that that's showing on this picture is part of what Dataverse is, but it is all hidden. All of that complexity is hidden from your users. So they don't have to know that all that stuff is going on behind the scenes. But if you are someone who has experience in any of these areas, you can feel confident that what's going on behind the scenes in Dataverse is a enterprise ready and operationally efficient solution. And then, of course, you can connect to Dataverse with Azure Functions, Event Hub, Service Bus, all that stuff. And you can connect into Dataverse as well with all of the things that we have in Power Platform. So I don't know if that is helpful or if anyone has questions.
There's no questions right now.
Okay, and then wrapped around all of this is the ability for us to administer all of the Power Platform. So again, from an IT perspective, I worked with customers. I've been in IT for longer than probably I'd like to admit, but I've worked with customers who had built their entire backend system was built on top of Access. And the reason why is a smaller company, and they hired their IT staff of one, and their IT staff of one, this was a while ago, so it was back in the day where they had a whole bunch of paper-based processes, and their IT staff of one was trying to figure out how he could build a solution that would allow them to track their data and where he could keep an eye on quality. And Access was a really good solution for him because he was not a sophisticated developer, but he understood relational data a little bit. And it was like worlds better than the paper that they had moving around. But it got to a point where Access could not handle the load from the business. And at that time, Access would crash if there was more than 5 concurrent users logged into it. So their business was being run on a server that was sitting underneath this guy's desk. And if a 6th person logged into the system, everything that all the other 5 people were working on got lost because the system would crash. And so when I came in as a consultant and I looked at that, I felt very nervous and a little bit sweaty when I saw that all of their processes were running on this one box, and thinking, well, what happens if this box goes down? There's like no backup policy, there was no business continuity considered, there was no extensibility with this solution. And so when I first heard about Power Platform, I thought this is Microsoft wants to enable our customers to get somewhere fast. And I thought, please don't let this be, and I know that Access is out there. Access still has its place, by the way, and Access helped a lot of people for a long time. So I'm not trying to pick on Access, but I'm just trying to say there are places for tools. There are things that you can do in a tool, but then there's a question of, but should you? And so with Power Platform, I was a little bit concerned that this was going to be another rev of kind of the Access world where we're like, yes, business users can do this and the business users can do everything. And then as an IT person and a data person, I'm like, yeah, but then what if they get the wrong answers? And yeah, what if they accidentally share sensitive information outside of our organization? And yeah, what happens though when we want to understand what was deployed to where? Like this sounds alarming to me. But I have become a believer in the fact that when we rolled out Power Platform, we rolled it out pretty thoughtfully. So it's all about enablement. How can we enable the business? But we have this administration piece to it that invisibly wraps around what your business users are doing so that you have the ability to help give your business users a safe place in which they can access data that they understand and they can use it in a way that makes sense to them and makes sense for their business while you keep an eye on what's going on. So there's the ability as an administrator to do things like set up different environments for your businesses to work within. And there can be one Dataverse per environment. So maybe you want to allow finance to spin up their own Dataverse that they can use to supplement all of the processes that they have going on, but you don't want to let marketing overlap with what's going on inside of that finance environment. So you can put walls around it. You can put gates, fences. So I have fences in my picture here. So there is the ability for an administrator to protect the business users, to enable them to do everything that they need to do in order to get business done safely and with high quality. So the next one is the data loss prevention. So there's data loss prevention rules that you as an administrator can set in your environments. There's also the ability across all of the Power Platform. So whether, and I didn't show you this, I'm sorry, but whether it is Power BI or it is Power Apps or it is Power Automate, you have the ability to integrate your solutions in with Git repositories and with Azure DevOps. So we can have source control can be part of the story, and not only source control, but we can leverage environments to do things like have a development environment and a testing environment and a production environment. So we can track what has been deployed to where, and we can automate the deployments and put some checks in there. So as an IT administrative team, you can help your teams understand when does it make sense to wrap DevOps around what they're doing versus when do you allow them to sandbox. So, and then from a monitoring perspective, there's also visibility. So as an admin, you can see everything that is happening within all of the Power Platform solutions. So you can understand usage. You can take things down that have been sitting in your environment that haven't been getting used. You can turn things off if you have a flow that's running every 30 seconds and it's not really doing anything, but it's costing you flow runs. So there's a whole administrative window that gives you visibility into what is going on with all of the Power Platform different pieces. So that makes me feel a lot better. And our story around this administrative piece and the DevOps piece has been growing and growing because governance is top of mind for all of our customers across all of their data as their data is scattering everywhere. They're trying to understand how can we wrap some governance around this. So Microsoft has been investing heavily in our governance tools. This is one of those. So take a deep breath and know that it's going to be okay if you're not the power user, but you're the person who has been responsible in the past for going behind the power users and maybe helping fix things that they did incorrectly because they didn't understand. So that's built into Power Platform. Okay, so now this is a new add-on for us. It was in preview for quite a while and it's been in preview in different revs, but we talked about virtual agent and I had that on one of my earlier slides. So I wanted to just do a really quick overview of virtual agent. So, okay, cool. I know how to create an app and I can publish it and I can automate flows, but what about all of the calls that people get? So what about the calls that HR gets about time off? What are the policies? What about the calls that legal's getting? What about the new people who are starting and they just need help to getting onboarded? So what if I wanted to have more of an interactive experience for end consumers so that they could kind of drive the direction? And so we do have virtual assistant. So virtual assistant is part of the Power Platform. It was in preview for a while. We used to have something that was called Q&A Maker, and Q&A Maker was a very simple version of Virtual Assistant, but Virtual Assistant is a very powerful tool. And when you create a virtual assistant, also called chatbot, so I put the two names up here because it seems to me that we use it. Oh, virtual agent is what's down here too. We use the terminology inconsistently. So these are the same thing. Virtual assistant, virtual agent, chatbot. These are all the same thing. So the idea here is, what if we allowed, and this one again, meant for end business users to be able to create these bots, but what if we allowed the business who really understands the questions that are coming in, who understands kind of that, and back to Alex's point earlier about doing a flow, you'd want to flow out what you want your chatbot to look like as well, but who understands the engagement, who understands the data, where the data is coming from. What if we could allow them to have a visual tool where they could build up this bot, and then we could publish the bot, and it would be published as an API that we could plug into an application, we could plug into Teams, we could plug in to a Power app. So That's what virtual assistant is. And so when you are thinking about virtual assistant or chatbot or virtual agent, the first thing that you need to do is figure out what topics would kick this off and what that flow looks like under the covers, and then you can publish it. And then there's the ability for that monitoring piece to be part of that virtual assistant. This would be the view that someone who authored this monitoring performance option here would be something that the author would look at, but then also the administrators of Power Platform could also see that these bots exist in their window as well. So for these, I just did some screenshots and I'm running lower on time. So I'm going to take us through quick. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to figure out topics. So if you want to play around with this, which I recommend you do because it's really fun, when you say I want to create a topic, I opened this up. I had these lesson 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are topics that are samples for you to learn from. So I decided for this thing, I was going to just start us off with lesson 2. I looked at lesson 4, but lesson 4 was hard to fit on my screen without me zooming in and out. So lesson 2, a simple topic with a condition. Let's see, so we're gonna do that. And when I clicked on that, here's what pops open for me. So we can see inside of this topic, we named it, gave it a friendly name, described it, but then we set triggers. So what are trigger phrases inside of our chatbot that would kick off this flow? And trigger phrases that they have here are things like, are there any stores in and around the area? Check store location, closest stores near me, find me your nearest location, store near me. You do not have to have word for word match on these trigger phrases in order for this flow to get kicked off, because underneath the covers, the listener for these trigger phrases is leveraging LUIS, which is our language understanding interface. I'm sorry, I forgot what the I and the S stand for. But what LUIS does is LUIS is an AI model that is able to take text in and understand the meaning of the text to do translation to synonyms. So you don't have to have exact matches here in the trigger phrases in order for it to pop open this. But this is an example of things that we think should be anything close to this. We want to kick off this flow. So then the next thing is we want to look in the authoring canvas to figure out what is that workflow that should get kicked off based on this trigger phrase occurring. So here's what this looks like. I think I did a couple zooms in for you. So we have the trigger phrase, which we just looked at, and then you can reply to that trigger phrase. So the reply here says, I'd be glad to help you find a store near you. And then ask a question. So which location are you interested in is the example here. And then there are, I think I might have zoomed that in for you. There you go. So which locations are you interested in? And you have the option of doing multiple choice, age, Boolean, city, color, okay? And the options for the users that come back then, so this one they picked multiple choice, which by the way, you probably wouldn't hard code in locations, but this is just an example of how a business user could leverage this. So if you had only 5 locations, you could hard code in multiple choice options and put your 5 locations. So this one, the example is Redmond, Seattle, Kirkland. So, all right. So then based on the answer that comes back, we can do swim lanes for what we want to happen. So here's that a little bit bigger. So if Redmond comes back, we can customize the message for Redmond versus Seattle versus Kirkland. And then we can say we're done with it. And then the next thing that you do is you just hit a publish. So virtual assistant, I've seen these swim laney things get longer and what seems like a little more complex, but this could save significant time for people in your organization if you have someone like an HR representative who gets asked a lot of, HR uses this a lot, by the way, who gets asked a lot of questions about what company policy is around X, Y, or Z. When do I get to renew my insurance options? When do I have to have my FSA spend done by? So this chatbot can get integrated into, and people integrate this often into teams. So if you have an HR team, you can have the chatbot be integrated into the team. So if someone types a message into the chat, by default, the bot will try to answer it. And if the bot can't answer it, you can also have one of your options be send this to a person now. So you've gotten to a point where you're too complex and you need to hand it off. Okay, so that was very fast, but that's an overview of virtual agent or virtual assistant or chatbot, depending upon which documentation you're looking at. So I just wanted to call out a couple newer features that are available in Power Apps and Power Automate. So Power Apps, I talked earlier a little bit already about how there's been a huge amount of interest from customers of Microsoft in leveraging Power Platform. There has been a huge amount of interest in expanding the use cases that can be supported by them. So that's where the Power Apps portals came in. We had many requests, and I don't know if they authored off of the question mark at the top of the screen, that's where engineering was watching, or if it was account teams that were bringing those requests back to engineering. But there was a request of, I'd like to be able to do this app. I'd like to be able to create this app, but I'd like to be able to create it for a partner of mine. So maybe I have a B2B scenario where a partner and I are working together through a process. I want to be able to connect with them. Or maybe I even have a B2C solution where I want end customers to be able to come in and interface with my information. So that Power App Portals extended it from just internal access to also granting external user access. Although I should clarify, because I said something confusing there. I said B2C, and in this Power Apps portal implementation, we do require authentication. So then the other part is, yeah?
We do have a question.
Oh, good.
So for the virtual assistant, are requests/interactions recorded?
Oh, I'm gonna have to take that as a follow-up because I don't know what telemetry is recorded. I know that we monitor and we track telemetry, so I think that we know which paths people go down, but I am guessing the answer is yes, but I don't want to say yes unless I know the answer is yes, so let me take that as a follow-up, unless Alex knows the answer.
I'm in the same boat as you, Val.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you said.
Yeah. And again, I'm fairly certain the answer is yes, but I don't like to guess. So
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you.
But response. I'm just going to note that. All right. Although you probably also have it in the chat window for me. Okay. And then another recent addition that we have to Power Platform is AI Builder. So for Power Apps and Power Automate, we have integrated AI Builder. And AI Builder here, if we look at this thing, we can do form processing, object detection, text classification, it says here, but we do also have the ability for you to do things like if there's an image, we can pull the text out of the image. So we can do text recognition as well as object detection with images. And there has been for a while the ability for us to do that the forms processing and OCR recognition. But if you have data sources that are not, if you want to integrate in data into your solution that is in image format or PDF format, so it's not something that is already Excel based or CSV based, we still have the ability to apply some models that we've built. These are cognitive services models, if you're familiar with cognitive services. So these models have been built and they're already available via API calls for developers, but we have also embedded them into the Power Platform so that you can leverage those same models in Power Apps and Power Automate. And if you are, I've been focusing on the Power Apps and the Power Automate context of Power Platform for this session, but just to clarify, you also can leverage models inside of Power BI. So that's an example of continued innovation in the Power Platform. And if you are curious as far as kind of where this is all going from Microsoft's perspective, the interest in Power Platform is huger than we could have possibly imagined. So Power Platform has been coming along rapidly in the last number of years, and I anticipate that it is going to continue to get heavy investment and will continue to get heavy enhancements. So this solution is not something that's going away anytime soon, and it is wildly popular. So if you have any concerns about building something somewhere and whether Microsoft is going to continue supporting this, this is a future direction for Microsoft, and it seems to resonate really well with our customers. So continued innovation, expect to see more and more and more. And what's cool about this is all that you need to do in order to see new features is you just open up your Power Apps portal, and your Power Apps portal will just continue popping up new options for you. So that wraps me. So thank you, and I think I'm going to hand it back over to you, Alex, because you had a few things that you were going to cover off on to wrap us.
Correct. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. What I'm going to be talking about is the licensing. And I do want to say that I am by no means a licensing guru at all, but I am going to try my best to give you a general overview of all the licensing around Power Apps and Power Automate.
Hold on 1 second. I think I'm still the video showing, and I think Alex would be better to show for this.
Yeah, sorry. I am trying to send him live.
See, I saw these great facial expressions.
All right, here we go. Alex, you are on and good to go. Sorry about that.
Okay, awesome. So again, we're going to talk about the licensing. We're gonna go over it. It's very general, but I do have a full guide that can be downloaded just by clicking on the hyperlink that I have here. So I'll make sure I give that to Caroline and Vanessa to send out after the presentation. So when you're looking at licensing, it really comes down to the intent. Like, what are you intending to do, and in trying to pick the proper licensing that's going to help you do that. So Microsoft really looks at that idea of intent, and the first one that they try to tackle is what's called use rights. And use rights are essentially just an extension off of these two suites that you have here. This is Power Apps licensing that I'm talking to specifically. So you might have noticed that when you're in your Office 365 suite, you already have access, or limited access, to Power Apps and Power Automate. And a lot of it has to do with trying to create solutions for your productivity and your collaboration. So as you can see here, I'll start on the right side with Power Apps use rights for the Office 365 licensing. You can see that you're able to run an unlimited number of apps that you would want to go with, and you can use a lot of those standard connectors, which is your SharePoint lists, your Outlook, those kind of connectors that are within the Office 365. Again, just an extension off of those programs that you have. You don't have the Dataverse when it comes to the Office 365 unless you have a selected license. There's licenses that do include that. So if you don't have the Dataverse license, you wouldn't be able to utilize that option. But a lot of times when you're looking at use rights for Office 365, you have a SharePoint list of employees that you want to notify separately. Again, with Teams, SharePoint lists, Word, anything that is within that Office 365. Then when you go over to Dynamics, as Valerie had said earlier, Dynamics 365 is built on top of that Dataverse, so that is included in that aspect. And here you'd be extending your use rights off of the applications itself and the programs within it. You'll get some of those standard connectors, and then you have some access to some premium connectors. When you want to do more standalone apps that isn't just an extension off of the Dynamics 365 applications, that's when you want to start looking at the premium licensing that you have available. The two separate licensing that you have there is either the per user license or the per app license. And the big difference between these two is that you look at it goes back to that intent of, Are you all in on Power Apps? Are you going to use a lot of different apps? You're going to create a lot of different ones, and you're going to have users using all these different apps. Then you probably want to use the per user license, because you get an unlimited number of apps that you get to use, unlimited number of portals, as Valerie was talking about, one of those new features. You got your standard and your premium connectors, and then of course the Dataverse file capacity is increased versus the per app license, because you're going to be having a lot of people using that. When you're looking at the Power Apps per app license, this is if you have maybe 1 or 2 business cases that you would want to create an app for. That's where you would get this license, which includes 2 apps and 1 custom portal. This license, the per app license, is stackable. So if you think about it, like if Jim creates an app and Susie wants to use that app, that's 1 app that they're able to use, and Susie creates an app, that's 2. But let's say there's a 3rd app in the mix from Tim. Well, in that instance, they wouldn't be able to use it because they're already using up 2 of those apps. So you can stack that license to add a couple more. And then it comes into that discussion of, well, we're buying all these per app licensing. It might make more sense to just do the per user license. When you're looking at Power Apps and Power Automate, it is considered a business application. So because of that, you'd require a license to use it. In addition to being within the same business environment, they'd have to be able to be in the same business environment to sign in, as Valerie was talking about earlier. So that means that your per app license, when you're buying those, the person that's going to be using it needs a per app license, and the person that created it needs a license as well. Moving along into the Power Automate licensing, it's very similar to the Power Apps licensing. It comes back to that intent. You have the use rights that we talked about earlier, which is an extension off of those applications that are within Office 365 and Dynamics 365. Same idea of whether or not you're able to utilize the Dataverse. If you're in Dynamics, you'd actually have that Dataverse to be able to leverage, whereas with Office 365, only certain licenses would have that Dataverse attached to it. The other use rights that Power Automate does have is if you have a Power Apps license, then you have use rights to use Power App or Power Automate, but only within the app that you're creating. So that's another use rights case that you're able to do. But let's say that you have like a process that's outside of these programs that you want to put into play. That's when you would look at the premium options for licensing. And they do something similar to Power Apps. Again, Microsoft making it very simple to get in on this licensing and to understand it, is that you have a per user license or you have a per flow license. So similar to per app versus per user, weighing your options. So the per user plan, you get unlimited amount of flows and automations that you can create. You got a certain amount of database capacity that you're able to leverage. And then towards the bottom there, there's that daily API request limit. And like I was saying during my presentation, the APIs are kind of, if you have a custom connector or if you have a connector in the background, there's an API that request that is happening. So you have a certain number that's a limit there. So the per user license is, you're going to be having a lot of people just creating things and having an unlimited amount of usage out of that. And then there's the per user with the robotics process. I'm blanking on the A, but Valerie was talking about that feature during her presentation. So you can include that RPA plan within your per user license. And that's a different charge. And again, with all the charges and stuff, they change so often. So I'll leave that to the account executive when you're talking. Be sure to ask your account executive about what might be right for you, both costly and both, intent behind it. The final
process automation, by the way.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Robotic process automation.
Thank you, Valerie. Yeah, I blinked on that A. So then the per flow plan, now that is the intent of, like, let's say you have 1 or 2 business flows within your organization that you want everyone to be using just to maintain process. Then you would do more of a per flow plan. You're not really wanting them to be creating new flows. You don't want them to be putting a bunch of automation out there. You want them to just use these flows. That's where you do the per flow plan. And with that one, you start off with a minimum of 5 flows that you would purchase. And then as you create a new flow that you would want more people to use, more business cases, then it would be an additional amount for every flow that you add on. But again, with the per flow plan, anyone can use it. You don't need to buy a single license for every single person within your organization. And that's why there's a value to that. But again, if you're going to be adding on multiple flows, like let's say you get up to 7 or 8, maybe you should consider looking into the per user plan to see if that's right for you. So that's pretty much the general overlook of all the licensing, and it comes down, like I said, to intent. What do you want to do? And from there, figure out which plan works best for you. So yeah, and is there any questions that haven't been covered during this presentation? Either Val or I can take it to the best of our ability. And by the best of our ability, I mean me.
It doesn't look like we have any questions right now, but we'll give everybody a minute to submit if they so please.
And again, we'll give these slides to Caroline and Vanessa to send out after the presentation. Are we seeing anything, Caroline?
We are not.
Okay.
So I will just close this out real quick. All right, well, thank you guys so much for attending this event. Like Alex said, keep an eye out for an email where you'll be able to access the presentation deck and the link to the event recording. If you need help implementing Power Platform into your business, you can contact your Success Account Executive or contact us via our website. And I am going to post the link to our website contact us page. And we hope you guys all have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.